So it's a pleasure for me to introduce to you two pioneers of the digital art. One of them being German, Frieder Nake, who started already in 1965, had his first exhibition in Stuttgart at that time. And the second person had a longer way coming over here from Minneapolis, is Roman Verostko, who started a little bit later to work with the computer. Each of them did their own programming, of course, at the time and continued to program their own work. But they will talk about this themselves a little bit more in detail now. We will have a short section, or a longer, shorter section, depends how it develops, with the two of them, and then you will be able to ask questions if you have any further questions to ask to one of them. So welcome, and to you, Frieder.
What I think we'll be doing is I have prepared a set of questions, short, brief, crisp, I hope, that I will ask Roman, and 20 roughly. But as soon as I've asked the first question, 3 new ones will appear and so on. So we'll do this, and you should be free to interrupt any time. If you don't, we find a close end and then do something a little differently. And I want to remark, Roman, we are sitting here, as somehow a little rusty figures, whereas these young guys are all artists, scientists, philosophers, designers. So I feel a bit inhibited. However, we are small enough a group such that the inhibition is not too strong. First question. Do you like this show?
I will try to give brief, crisp answers also. Yes.
Why?
I think it does two things for me. I mean, it represents two aspects of my work. One aspect of my work is can be extremely spontaneous and very emotionally involved, or obviously so, such as in the brushwork. On the others, but there's an inner discipline that's not so obvious, okay? That's one aspect. The other aspect is that I'm very interested in structure, always was influenced by the constructivist, early 20th century constructivists especially. And the pen and ink drawings especially exhibit the kind of discipline and technological control that I admire very much in work also. So these two aspects of my work I often try to bring together in the same field. In this instance, I'm doing it mostly in two separate fields. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Roman, take one of these, the most recent ones,
okay,
and tell us a bit of how have you done them?
Okay, that's a good question. Let's take anyone. I'll stand for this. Okay, so I just point and say, frog jump, one of my favorites. Oh, microphone, sorry. Yeah, we're okay. We're okay. I think we didn't lose it. I called it frog jump. By the way, the titles are arbitrary, and but I can say, as I did in my statement, that as I completed these works, they evoked experiences in my past life, and this one was frog jump. Essentially, in creating these works, the first step was to let my code generate a series of brushstrokes. And in this instance, there were a series of brushstrokes generated, this one first, and then a series pretty much like this. I did possibly, and I'll never remember for sure, I always have the option, if I choose, to reposition a stroke, but these are approximately how the pen plotter, the code that I write generated the idea or the concept of the stroke. You don't see it exactly. It's a vector graphic for those who understand programming. And it's just, but I do put a mnemonic on my screen so I could get a rough idea what it is like. Then I save that information, prepare my palette of inks and my paintbrush or brushes, and then I turn on my brush mode. And when the plotter, when my code is in a brush mode, it knows that it's going to have to brush. So the plotting arm moves to brush position for the first one and says, give me a brush. So I give him a brush, and it executes the stroke. Now this is not the first stroke. The key stroke I save until last, and I am controlling the sequence as I see fit. So I could say stroke number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. And so I also chose and made the decision that I would always vary the color in these series. And I established a palette for the series. So in that sense, I was in control. I did not allow my code to make those decisions in this instance. I made those decisions. But I could just as well ask the code to do it. But in this instance, I didn't. I had enough to do, as it were. So then for each stroke, we went through this routine until this was done. And the very last stroke was going to be this heavier brush, black. And the reason for the black was in my own mind, and that was, again, a decision I made. The code wouldn't make this kind of decision. I realized that it would give me a binding element, a key element throughout the course of these works. It's for that reason that this stroke is always, the black stroke is always the first one in this column. This, of course, echoes Oriental writing, and you see my Oriental seal. And the choice to place what I look at as kind of a script or calligraphy, the choice of placing these here is my own choice. So I set the sequence. And then then I use another kind of brush. This kind of brush is a self-inking brush, and it's very small. In this instance, I'm using Pitt pen brushes, which I didn't have 10 years ago, but they're wonderful. Otherwise, I would be probably using a heavy ink pen or something like that. So then I have developed code that can do the job, and it will, of course, take the pen brush, and it will script. Pen will go down, write one, pen will lift, will move the next position, and it will do the sequence for me. And that's how it is achieved. And in the end, if I'm pleased with it, and I'm not going to discard it, I give it my seal, and I sign it. And if we're all lucky, it gets here hung on the wall.
So you have to be pleased by the result?
Yes.
And decide to keep it, not to throw away.
Yeah, that's a question. Boy, let me tell you, this would be a book. You know, Frieder, that one of the problems is, in fact, precisely that. Maybe later we should talk about decision a great deal. I'm very interested in what I call the decision bit. And decision is not something it's something I wrestle with all the time. I do not have an easy answer for the question. I try to give, initially, it was my intention in late 70s that my code would be expert enough to make all decisions. And that in the end, I would be pleased with that. And by the way, for your information, Harold Cohen and I have talked about this at length. Harold is still interested to get his Aaron to actually make all decisions that he himself would agree with. I would like theoretically to talk sometime with anybody who would like to pursue this question. It's a question that is of great interest to me personally, professionally too, but I am not going after that today.
I tell you one little thing.
Yes.
Since you mentioned Harold Cohen and you had to mention him.
Of course, Harold had a great influence on me.
I will probably write Harold's biography. Should I write yours also?
A brief answer?
Say no. Okay,
Let's talk on that.
Yeah, we
I think I might be saying yes, but I don't. It's a big question.
It's a big question, yeah. But you know, I'm very young, so I can still do this.
That's right. Go on.
Is the material important to you? The material of the brush, the material of the ink paint, the material of the paper?
Yes, each one, all of the above, for a brief answer. I'm especially interested with my, in this instance here, I'm using it's an Italian rag paper, and it has qualities that I like for brushwork, and it is also able to handle, to a degree, the ink work. It's not the case in those where I have to use more of a bristle, something that is more adaptable to long-term penmanship, as it were. So what happens, yes, that texture is important to me, the quality of the paper. Also, the inks are permanent, and in this instance, I'm mixing both watercolor and permanent inks. I use different sources for my inks. This is an India ink here. I'm very careful about mixing them. I mix all my own. I don't mix from scratch like in the old days. I don't grind the pigment and things, but I do buy permanent inks from different sources, and I mix my own colors and that kind of thing.
Permanent Roman here means 30 years?
Permanent means, permanent is a relative term because obviously nothing is permanent. It means generally light fast, means that with good control of light, not too much daylight on a work, it should last for hundreds of years, a couple hundred years, yeah.
Wow.
As long as you protect it and put UV, and you wouldn't want to leave it in heavy ultraviolet, regardless of what they tell you about so I would use UV, ultraviolet protection, what do you call it, glass or acrylic and so forth. So in other words, museum grade the whole way, acid-free, all those things.
Yes.
Of course, you would not want to do otherwise.
I'm not.
By the way, the new generation often doesn't understand this. It's extremely, I didn't know this when I was younger. And a lot of my early works faded and turned yellow because I didn't know what I was doing. It's extremely important to know what acid-free means when you're dealing with paper, pen and ink.
But by the time acid was something different.
Well, that's true. Okay, I think I made a point there. But texture for an ink pen is different than texture for a brush. But all these things you learn, of course.
Roman, I'm not certain that we all already understand fully, as much as possible, the relation between the large strokes here, the colored ones, and the small little signs. What is the relation between them?
In this instance, and I'm also going to confess something after this for Frieder's benefit. They are, in every instance here, every brush stroke that's contained, that's in the drawing or in the painting, is repeated here. It's scaled down, and this is the poetry here. This is a statement about the poetry. For me, the poetry is this wonderful gestural brush strokes, and this statement summarizes those strokes. This is the black one. So you could find every one in here. And right at the moment, I'm a little bit afraid to start looking for them all, but they're in here. Believe me, you could find every brushstroke that's here is contained in here. Yeah. And so, in a sense, what I was doing was this. In the history of my work, you're going to find script-like characters at different periods in different ways. And I could explain to you now, and this would be terrible for any historian to have to deal with. In many instances, my scripts, I call them glyphs. In many instances, my glyphs are associated with an alphabet and are translations of a text. And in many instances, they're not rational meanings at all. They're strictly visual forms. In this instance, everything is a visual form. There is no intentional textual idea. So if it says butterfly event or frog jump, That simply means that there was a moment when I finished this, of all the beautiful things I was able to get out of the experience, that instance to me was butterfly moment, and this was frog jump, etc. But that doesn't, all that means is, for me, I recall once Picasso had said something, or was quoted as saying, you don't, when you look at a beautiful flower, let's say just a very beautiful tulip in the spring, you're not asking, what does the tulip mean? You're looking at the beautiful tulip. My works are intended to be, in and of themselves, original art forms to be experienced as a visual form. And I'm in the tradition of the early concrete and artists of the early 20th century who made artwork that did not refer to other reality. It was in and of itself the object, like a beautiful vase. So it's a beautiful visual form. So that's the poetry here. This is the statement about the poetry and is part of the poetry. Okay.
What is interesting here is that the way you talk about this entire picture and the relation between these parts, you could interpret, I try to do it, as you're talking about concrete art.
Yes.
Concrete art usually doesn't look this. No, it looks quite
different.
But
Frieder, I like the question.
Is, you know?
Yes, thank you. Beautiful question. We never did take abstract expressionists as concrete art. But I could say this, of the best, in my book, like Franz Klein, whom I knew, and Robert Rischenberg, I studied with him at Pratt Institute even later in my life, and George McNiven. Some of the others who are not so well known, they were absolutely concrete artists. But we didn't look at it that way. I think part of the reason was, or has been, that I think they were concrete artists, but we'd like to get into that at some moment. I would just say briefly this. One of the influences underlying the interpretation of abstract expressionism, that's New York School, post-World War II, was, in France it would be a painter like Soulage, for example. Here it was the predecessor were German expressionists who had subject matter. But what the point was is that there was this idea that one might reach underneath conscious life to unconscious activity or something, and if one could get rid of rationality and get totally into the automatism of the early Dada, and just let that brushstroke out, and this was the idea of abstract expressionists, and I was in New York at the middle of that period, and I could say this was very commonly believed, that we could emotionally let inner experience emerge. And I was also interested in this question. But the truth of the matter is that whatever it is, it's visual. And if you're going to see something in it, I don't suppose it's really a concrete art. It wasn't about something. I hope that says something about it. But I probably added to confusion. Sorry about that.
No, that's
Frieder.
Nice. I think we got a little somewhere already. Okay. But Norman, I put on my algorithmic hat. How does your machine, your program, design these little scribbles? No?
Okay.
Like mathematically?
Yes, okay, I could do that. It's really a very simple affair to generate. Let's take this large black one because you could see that one, okay? There's a way in which any of you who've worked with a graph in a Cartesian grid, if you look at your financial statement and it's got all this thing, what happens is when they make those curvy lines, they've got to have what you could call control points. The shape or the slope of the curve on a graph or a chart is determined by a number of points. In this instance, how do we get those points? I'll first of all identify them in this instance, and then we'll try to discover, well, how do you do that? Okay, that's not very complicated, really. First of all, you have to have a sleeper point somewhere, but I play the trick that I know Jean-Pierre does this trick too. I use the ending point as a sleeper for the starting point, and I use a starting point as a sleeper for the ending point, so it makes it. And so there would be one here, there would probably be one here, maybe one here, here, here. another here, and then maybe a short one here, possibly because it flipped over, and there would be one here and here. So let's say that many. And then what happens is I have I don't have to have this in my pen plotters now, but I do run what's known as a Bezier curve is plotted then. It's a kind of a procedure for generating a smooth curve slope. So there will be 1,000 of these bits of information per inch just going to the pen plotter. It just makes those very quickly. And so it strikes that curve, and it can do that. What we do is we actually have the ability then to, with that very simple piece of information, it's about, each piece of information is an X and a Y code position. So it's two pieces of information for each one. There will be about 10 of them in this instance. And all the pen plotter needs to do, all the pen plotter needs then to, how do I say this? My program only needs to know that much, and then I have a little routine that will translate it and generate all that other information that's done in real time, and that happens. That can happen. So we have that little piece of information put away. With that bit of information, each one of those points, boy, this is more technical to explain. I use triangulation, and probably in this instance, this would be 0, 0. This would be the 0, this would be the x-axis, the y-axis, and there will be a triangulation for this point, for that, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that work I have done that's already established. I already built the program that knows how to do all these things. So it is able to scale all of that information, make it any size I want, or I can stretch it and move it and do whatever I want. And I've written all the code for that. I have to say, I use no store-bought material code in my work. Which surprises a lot of people, even the scaling and anything I do. But I do, this is scaled then. I can take that same stroke here, and I can decide that I would like it to fit this scale here. And actually I use some of the pen plotter's brain can do some of this for me. If you understand what your pen plotter knows, you can tell it how to do some of this for you. So this is how I do it. Does that answer the question, kind of?
Beautifully.
Detail.
I think beautifully. Yes, that's
it's a lot of work. Yeah. My code is thousands of lines, by the way. It's not, but the actual workhorse is nothing. It's just a little routine of about 15 lines. It's so simple. It's unbelievable. So So how did we get those points? That's the thing we didn't answer. That's the biggie, by the way. That is the good one. And that I've worked on now for 30 years, and I still work on it. That is how I set my parameters for a specific purpose and why I do that. There will always be a certain number of factors in deciding each of those things. Essentially, the way it's done is I will know how big first up front I have to tell my program how big the paper is. So it will know what size it's dealing with, what this length is relative to this length. It's just a proportion. It needs to know that. Once it knows that, then I can tell it also how many increments this way and how many this way. So I'll tell it 1,000 per inch, so I can make it real fine. Okay, and that's how we go. Then what we could do is very simple. If we had the right kind of dice, we could just throw some dice and say, give me a number between 1 and 1,000. For my X, you get 1. Or you could throw the dice again and get 1 for your Y, and you get another one. You put those two together, you got a point. Now that would be a wide open procedure, and one actually can do that. And by the way, I've done that too. And it's interesting what you get. Because then you could have a filter that says, well, if you do this, I don't want to use that one. You could give some rules why you accept this, why you won't accept that. But those things one learns from experience. And that's how I learned how to do I started from scratch and I built each stage. So now I have some filters that says all kind of things. I might say, and I control those filters. I can tell them not more than and not less than such and such a degree, such and such a length, such and such an angle. And then with all of those controls, I have learned how to control to some extent how the character of the drawing will emerge. Now that you only learn by long experience, trial and error. It's a kind of a science. It's very interesting. And it's interesting because my wife was had her doctorate in psychology at the University of Chicago, but when she was doing her thesis, she worked with statistics probabilities in human experience, and the consequence was it was a good conjunction, because once in a while she would say, you know, Roman, you ought to think about this or that, and that was very useful to me because it also helped me in my discipline in how to proceed. So all of my work, for those who really want to know, I write in BASIC, GW BASIC. My programs would run on an early PC with, a 64-bit. I'm an 8-bit machine even. Well, it would be a little bit hard. I don't do that quite. But I still work in DOS, and that's how I do it. So the programs are very simple. They're very simple-minded. I use nothing beyond plane geometry. I don't use fractal geometry. That doesn't mean I don't respect fractal procedure. I think Mandelbrot was a great thinker, by the way. I've had the opportunity to hear him lecture, met him, monitored one of his students' papers.
Let me perhaps a little unpolitely interrupt you here,
Yes.
Roman, and just tell us, when did you decide to work by computers?
I think my decision would have been in 1969.
In 1969 already?
Yes,
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
And I took a course in Fortran at the Control Data Institute in 1970. And by the way, Alice took the course with me. So we both are certified Fortran.
Are you still using
amateurs.
Fortran now?
No. I work in BASIC, and it's
as you said,
it
just
may seem kind of strange,
yeah,
but that's
yeah.
what I do.
Old-fashioned. Okay, that's allowed. The step back. 80% of all programs in the world are written in Fortran. You know?
Yeah,
you should have stuck to it. It's a terrible
it's
language.
more powerful, yeah.
It doesn't matter. So in 1969 already you thought, and did the computer frustrate you?
Well, I never had that much experience with it until I had my own computer. I took a course and I had punch cards, tried to do things. I wasn't very successful, to tell you the truth. But I stuck with it.
Always fell down.
Well, I couldn't get access, and I didn't have unless I have like 8 hours a day, forget it. I could go once or twice. So the truth is that my real programming didn't begin until I had my own PC, and that's why I'm a 1980s person.
So what was that? Now, if you think back to this time, you took a course in Fortran, which for an artist must be terrible.
Oh yes, that was, some of my colleagues didn't think I was too smart to get involved. I was also, there were circumstances. What isn't well known, I think, internationally is that Minneapolis happened to be the place where we had the first, where Seymour Cray lived, and the founder of Control Data and the founder of Cray Supercomputer, they're all University of Minnesota. What happened was Minnesota developed the Control Data was the first one to build the smaller computers that went international big time. And the first supercomputer was done in the metro area of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that was Cray Supercomputer. So I had the opportunity at least to be in the backyard of these things and very much influenced by the people who worked with them. And I turned up, so in any event, to answer your question about influence, I did do synchronized audio-visual, I programmed synchronized audio-visual works in the 1960s. And I have been attracted and drawn very much to art and technology. Another aspect to it all was that I had a grant in 1970 from the Bush Foundation, and I spent a 3-month period with Yuri Kepish at MIT at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. And this was, the Center for Advanced Visual Studies was founded in 1968. It was the year I got married to Alice and had left my monastic life. And I recall going to visit Yuri when he opened that because I had read The New Landscape and I wanted to be involved with what they were doing at MIT. However, I didn't qualify to be part of his operation that year, but when I got the grant, he allowed that I could be there at the center and work with him. And the consequence was that I became very interested in, and as my statement did for the grant, was I was very interested in humanizing the emerging technologies. I wanted to be involved with somehow involved in bringing a marriage between these emerging technologies and the arts. That was my goal, and I have statements that date from that period for that. And so that naturally meant computing technology too. As some of you might know or might not know, the Center for Advanced Visual Studies was replaced by the current MIT
Media Lab.
Yes, Video Lab.
Yeah.
I mean, Media Lab.
Media.
And that, as a matter of fact, the last time I was in Harvard, and or last time I was in Boston, and I went over to see the old center, wasn't there.
But we should really stress that once more.
Yeah.
Many of the members in the audience will know about this. György Kepes, original Hungarian, who founded this advanced center of visual studies at MIT in the 60s, which grew into worldwide known Media Lab, MIT Media Lab. That's really
correct.
important. And the New Landscape, that book, heavily to be recommended.
Frieder, thank you. I was hoping that someone would clarify this more, because I think that György Kepes's book had a big influence on me. For those who understand that Kepes was one of the first people to really have a clear mind on what he labeled the new landscape, which all new media are working with constantly. When you bring somebody like Eduardo here, you're bringing in that new landscape that he envisioned. Or when you do this, enough of that. That's it. I think the idea.
Still on the same kind of biographical topic, how much did you need, do you still need, of mathematics? Do you need mathematics? Do you need any?
Well, yes.
You talked about Bézier curves.
I use mathematics all the time, but I never think about it more than just plain geometry is all I've ever known much, and that's what I use, so I suppose that's my limit.
Okay.
I wish I knew a lot more. I know a lot about the history and the theory, of course, and by the way, right now I'm a book, well, I'll recommend that later.
A book by you?
No, I'm currently reading The Drunkard's Walk by Vladimir Mladov, I think it is. He's at the he's at Berkeley. And it touches everything that interests me. Probability theory is an aspect of statistics that I could lose my life in. I mean, it's just fascinating to me. I think probability theory is one of the great keys to the human event. And we still don't really deal with it realistically. One example just happened in our election in the state of Minnesota. They will run a recount. The error is less than 1%, and the recount will probably have a similar error. So a recount isn't going to be more accurate if they understand probability. So
True.
It's interesting.
Roman, perhaps coming to a close of this part of our meeting here, where I am allowed, thank you, to ask you questions. Do you enjoy what you do here?
Yes, because I enjoy it because it gives me an opportunity to get feedback, and usually when I get back home, the things I pick up in my trip have an effect on what I do next. So certain questions come, and I have to rethink how I think about that. That's very useful. And it's interesting, and I enjoy the people. I'm generally rather reclusive. I get up in the morning, go to my studio, work all day, and so to get out is probably a good idea.
How long does it take to have your machine finish one of these?
One of those pen plotted drawings could be as like just the actual execution of the thing. Oh, sometimes 10, 15 hours, something like that.
10, 15 hours?
We're going to do one, these less. I think I'm going to be able to manage one of those in 8.5. If I have everything ready without interruption, without failure, without anything. Because the ink pen has to succeed the entire, you could imagine an ink pen with, you put the ink in, and you come down 2 hours, you're watching it, and 1 hour later the ink pen fails. I have built-in fixes, but it doesn't, and Jean-Pierre has the same problem, and I'm sure Hans knows this too. It doesn't matter what kind of fix you make. The problem is, it's like a handmade rug. When the yarn runs out and you get this little knot or something, something breaks. So you get all these little glitch things, and then how much of that is acceptable in the finished work? If you study the drawings, you might eventually see one of my moments, put it that way. And so that could end up, you lose it, and then you start again, or those are part of the problems. It's okay to interrupt me and stop me, I go on forever.
No, people should be aware of this. Still takes time.
It takes a lot of time.
It's not a production where you hit the start button and then they just fall out of the machine. This still takes time. And why does it take time?
Well, there's preparation of ink, there's preparation of, what do you call it, the code, the software. To get everything just right to go, you could have a day's work before you start anything.
And the machine must draw.
And the machine,
right?
yes, and then the machine has to draw, and then usually I do these in 2 stages because I'll do that, and then I'll do this field. But earlier works of mine were often single sessions, but then there were other hazards. I wouldn't go into all of it, but we'd have to get the specific work. My project, for example, at the University of St. Thomas has 3-foot by 6-foot pen plots. I could have the unit in my pen plotter for a week. That doesn't mean that it was running for a week. It meant it was probably ran for 30 hours, 40 hours, something like that. And of course, the track was wearing very thin. I had a lot of failure. It was frustrating. I almost gave up. And somehow or other I got through 11 panels like this. But it was close to a year's work. And you would look at that and think, oh yeah, some people said, oh yeah, you had a computer made that, huh? Go.
Last little topic, where do you think Roman digital art is heading to?
Oh, I think...
Where's it going?
Wow. I think we can all talk about it, and Wolf may know more. He has a broader vision. From my point of view, I'm very interested in where the whole information revolution is going, and we're part of it in the arts. What does it mean for the arts? Oh, it's not going to be what I do, I don't think, but what I do, I think, is indicative of the power of an algorithm to transform almost anything. Meaning, it's like life itself. I think art is going to become more and more an extension of living. I'm not quite sure how to think about that. That's too hard of a question for me, Frieder. We better have another session up at Bremen.
I hoped that you would tell us,
I think it's going to be like the question that Francesca's dealing with, the history of, what do you say, what happened to the history of art? Yeah. What happens to the history of art depends a lot, and let's not give away our secrets now. We'll do this in Bremen. We'll do a little session for them in London. But here's the point. The point is, it's what we ourselves are understanding as art, I think, is a big part of it. And if digital gives us tremendous power that I think people themselves will have the prosthesis in the future for controlling and shaping their environment more and more. rather than having it shaped for them. I think that's one of the consequences. Is that going to be better or worse? Then will we need entrepreneurs to come and help you shape your environment? That's the question, I think.
You know what? You are currently in a country, Germany,
Yes.
where further south in Stuttgart, people are trying to do this, but they are beaten up.
Yeah.
They get beaten up for trying to inform their own environment. Hans, would you take up this last question I asked him, or is that mean of me? Now, where is digital art heading? This is Hans Dedinger.
Young people that grow up with computers will use them in a very different way than we did it, because we were sort of witness of how this technology broke into the world, and the next generation or the next generation, they will just use it and do anything with it. And I think our imagination is not big enough to describe what they will be capable of doing with it. And it will be, I would like to live 100 more years and just look at this later. And probably would be very surprised. I think there is a lot of things coming. And maybe that's it.
Well, wonderful, thank you. Wolf, do you allow me to do this if we pass on the microphone to Marius? The same question, because he's now...
Well,
this is Marius Schwarz.
Well, thank you, Frieder, for asking the question. I think actually the point that Hans made is quite good, that in a way the way that we understand computing today might be completely different from the way that we understand computing 20 years from now. I've made the point several times that the worst sort of excesses of 90s philosophy of sort of cyberculture and the cyborg and whatnot, all of those things which were very scary to most people in the 90s, we've all now completely accepted because it came in the form of an iPhone. You're totally willing to accept the iPhone to become a part of your life all the time, but you're not willing to let metal penetrate your body, perhaps. So that's the difference in vision, but it's still the same thing has very much come to pass. So I think these new media will very much transform how computing technologies affect us, but also our environment will be affected by computing technologies in more subtle ways. For instance, architecture is now being, of course, CAD software has been around for many years, but now scripting and generative strategies are becoming more popular in the very creation of the basic form of the building, of optimizing the building, for instance, for greener purposes, etc., and creating also new formal architectural languages, which I think is really, really interesting, and we're just starting to see the beginning of that. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Roman, in particular, 10 times, which I just don't spell out. Thanks a lot now for having
Frieder, thank you for
doing this.
Thank you for
Wolf, I pass on to you. No, you are the master here.
Not really. I'm happy to work with good artists, that's always fantastic. Any more questions? That's the chance. Any more questions to Frieder Nake, perhaps, or?
Maybe a small comment. Not a question. I was very much interested by your glitches when you mentioned that some of the things can go wrong, and of course we all know this. Everybody who has struggled with computer knows it. But my question is have you ever tried to deliberately use the failures of the computer to produce something unexpected, because it's a sort of randomness also.
Of course.
And because this is what interested me a lot.
Yes, and
you push the machine to do something it's not designed for, and it makes something wrong, and you push it even more, and when whatever comes out is a surprise, and you like it.
Yes, I think that's another aspect we didn't go into, but I am in total agreement with you that this is one of the... Of course, I'm always interested. Please surprise me, of course. The problem, as you know, is when I first began work with a simple thing like a random walk as a drawing, I recall that people like Sidney Simon from the University of Minnesota said, well, look, Roman, you're going to do this and proceed, then don't edit, don't interrupt. And so I have a whole series wherein I've done this, and I look for the surprise, and I'm interested in that. I think I've worked both ways, and I have no answer to it. If you open the parameters wide open and let surprises happen, sometimes those things you reject, if you put them away a year later, you think, my goodness, why didn't I use this? This is really interesting. And that's part of the problem in decision making is we tend to decide to accept the familiar. It's the unfamiliar that is a problem for us. And I had a teacher, Robert Rischenberg, who taught me this. He said, and I mentioned this yesterday to somebody here, it's like walking the beach, looking for that rare shell. And it's often, there's so many that are so familiar, but it's that rare one that might be the new direction for you in your work too. And that's part of what it's about. I don't have an answer to this. I think we have to find a balance between the surprise and that which is familiar and that which allows us to go forward without being stupid or something. But who knows what that is, so I don't know.
Hans, the computer doesn't commit any errors. It's us who commit the errors.
Yes, that's right.
The computer error, I mean the technical failures.
Okay.
Oh, you mean technical failure?
Yeah. That's
Yes. Oh, that's.
Mechanical stuff on
This is very good point. I remember once.
we make the mistakes.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
Technical
Little failures.
And
Yeah.
the long time it takes, which is precisely the reason why they are gone. The plotters are not available anymore because it takes so long. They are replaced by something else, and it needs people like you who have a lot of time to still work on this.
Well,
Probably
now that you.
Are you accusing him of having too much time?
Hans, I have to tell you this one.
He has the privilege of having the time.
Yeah.
No, Hans, you will appreciate. He will appreciate this one because Hans knows the context. It must have been maybe the second or third time I went out to Santa Barbara, and I'm visiting our colleague Jean-Pierre, and he's been plotter.
He has mentioned that name 3 times or 4. Jean-Pierre Hébert, a Frenchman living in California.
That's right. Yeah, Jean-Pierre works with pen plotters, and I made a special trip out to meet him because I was interested in finding people who worked with pen plotters. That's how I met Hans, I guess, eventually. Which way? But there I was, coming up his driveway, and I could hear that machine going, and I go in there, and he's got this drawing. He was very disappointed, and he was showing it to me. The pen had gotten honed to a sharp knife edge. It dug into that rag paper, and it tore a path. And I said, but JP, I said, that is absolutely magnificent. It's beautiful. Don't toss it. That's one of those instances, maybe.
So what we see here, we put this meeting under the heading of the joy of digital, which may be a contradiction in itself. These examples now, failures, errors, happenings, they have to do with the material, and the material is something different from the plan to perhaps do something with the material. In between is a machine. In these cases, you could say an old-fashioned machine, still moving, taking 8 hours. That's already material. So you experience this, and it's different, very different from current days, when digital art means something that you enter some room and you make a movement, or you blink with your eyes and something happens there. Or you don't even go to another space, you sit at home, in a terrible posture with a screen in front of you, or a large one in your home, and you do something there, you fiddle around, you touch something, you are a kind of a new virtuoso, and something great happens there. This is a very great a break in between. It seems to me that people in digital art of whichever wherever they come from, still have to understand this, the break between what you stand for, what Hans Dehlinger stands for, to what these young people like Marius, Helge Fischer and others here stand for, taking something for granted that recently was not granted at all, not at all. This seems to be a funny experience in humankind. Marius, you want to say something?
Well, it's actually kind of funny that you bring this up. Because I was just discussing with someone else yesterday about plotter drawings. I'm actually, right now, I just did my first plotter drawings ever using a CNC cutting machine which you can mount pens on. It's not as sophisticated as a plotter, but it's a new device, so it's not old, but it's basically the same thing. And I think actually the conversations I've been having with a lot of artists who are, of my generation, who grew up with screens and real-time applications, obviously this work was done when screens were very incapable. They were very inelegant devices. And I congratulate you on the wisdom of using, an elegant medium of paper instead of working with screens in the 80s, which would have probably meant that your work wouldn't look so good anymore. But one of the things that's happening now is that people are turning to fabrication technology, digital fabrications, such as laser cutters or CNC milling machines or 3D printing, etc., to escape the screen, because the screen is even to this digital generation, it's too immaterial, and this ephemeral quality of the work at some point becomes very depressing. Even though it has a great freedom, the ability to ship your work off to an exhibition in China, over email is of course very practical, but it also comes with this great letdown that once you turn off the screen, it's gone. So I see an interest in working also with technologies like plotting, etc., as a way of also investing more into the materiality of the execution. It's the fact that the screen is this sort of idealized world, but always you're always as an artist responsible for taking it out of that world and manifesting it in some way. And then in doing so, I've found that the best results generally come when you embrace the materiality of whatever process you've chosen. And I think, Roman, it's very clear in your work that you're a virtuoso of your specific material, and I think that's so wonderful to see in your pieces. So I thank you.
That was very kind of you. I appreciate, though, you're bringing up the milling machine example and also the cutting machine. Because the pen plotter and the cutter are the same almost. And JP and I had thought about the idea of possibly engraving with a, actually doing the engraving and then prints, which would be a nice way to go too. Interesting.
So we come back here, the joy of the digital is in the material that the digital denies. Funny, it's a deep dialectics, I believe. It's perhaps the dialectics, or one of the dialectics of current times, maybe.
Frieder, may we ask you a question?
I cannot answer anything.
When you began and you first had access to a plotter for drawing, what were your reactions? What were your feelings? I mean, what did you expect, or what did you anticipate? How you approached this thing? It must have been new, totally new for you. You had no predecessors.
I tell you the story.
Good.
It's a nice little story. It's not long, but it's a beautiful story. It has to do with two people, a professor and me. The professor was young, hardly older than me. I was even younger, quite young, a student. So I was working at the University of Stuttgart in the computing center as a student helper, kind of. And he one day came and said he wasn't from Vienna, still living, so I cannot mimic his Austrian accent, but it would be nice because it would be more friendly. So he says, you know what, we are buying a drawing machine. This is in 1963, I should say. This is 1963, spring 1963. We are buying a drawing machine. I had no idea what he was talking about. A drawing machine. Well, drawing I understood, machine I understood, but what is a drawing machine? Something that draws, apparently. So I looked at him, nice. So he says, but you know what? And this is in the computing center, we don't have any software. I said, well, that's also very interesting. And then his third question was, would you write it? So I say yes. This it starts. I had no idea. So I did not have any expectations, with the exception of, here I am, a young student, they buy a machine. As long as I develop the basic software for that machine to draw, I didn't see the machine, I had no idea what it was. I only knew the specifications of that machine. And for that, I then wrote the standard package, which, when I started to test it, I decided, oh, well, it's stupid to do it the mathematical way. You try out all possibilities. Why don't I inject some probability?
Yes.
Some pseudo-random number?
Exactly.
Why don't I take up what Max Spencer had told us about art having to do with science? You create science. That's it. That's the story. Okay.
That's a good story. Thank
You
you.
made a small mistake. In your story, you mentioned the computing center where this machine was located. There was no computing center at that time. It was called Institut für Numerische Mathematik. No computer center was around at that time.
Wait a minute, Hans. It's great, no, because he was there also in Stuttgart, next door or something. This is where it all happened. But Hans, you are right and a bit wrong. There was a computing center for the university. However, when you became aware of, when you started to think, you are right, it was called the Institute for Instrumental Mathematics. Would you believe this? Institute for Instrumental Mathematics. But there was the computing center also, and there were two bosses. The Viennese had the Institute for Instrumental Mathematics, and the old guy he still had to get rid of. So the story here is that it may so happen that one of us is in this situation or in that situation, and the situation has its peculiarities, and then we may come into a position where we can make use of it. That's it. It's always really material. It's always real situations, I believe. It's not our great way of thinking. Michael Null at the same time was doing the same at Bell Labs.
That's right.
And later he said, in a paper, you can read it, I'm not making this up, 88 I think in Leonardo. So he said, and only later I heard that in Germany some people had done something similar. It was an idea in the air.
And the idea.
Yeah.
That's another interesting, well, let's not go into it.
So I think we are coming to a point where it's the right time to say thank you very much, both of you, for this very interesting talk and all the secrets you revealed to us. Thank you, Roman. Thank you, Frieder. And thank you for coming here and joining us for this event. So have a nice Saturday, and please stay for a moment and you can personally talk to them. Thank you very much.